What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, July 28th, 2016. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Today is the last day of that three-ring circus they're calling the Democratic National Convention. All they're missing are acrobats and jugglers and lion tamers and the rest of that. But definitely the clowns are already on display on that stage there. Now, the Senate Democratic leader, Harry Reid, has basically come on out and stated the incredibly obvious. The Democratic National Committee was not fair to Bernie Sanders. Well, duh. Talk about a study in foregone conclusions. But it gets even more interesting than that. Election Justice USA did a study of the already known instances of fraud and irregularities during the Democratic primaries, and they have calculated 184 delegates that should have gone to Bernie Sanders were wrongfully given to Hillary Clinton. And this would have been enough to reverse the outcome of the nomination. In other words, if there had been no cheating, Bernie Sanders would have won that nomination. So now you understand why his backers and supporters are so angry. Now, there's an interesting little footnote to this. When we talk about the discrepancies between the exit polls and the official results, if they differ by more than 2%, it's seen by the United Nations as evidence of election fraud. Just 2%. The Stanford study showed that the discrepancy in those precincts where electronic machines were being used was running an average of 8 to 9% in favor of Hillary. In the worst case, 13.9% difference between the official results that gave Hillary the delegates and the exit polls. 13.9%. Now, today, the corporate media is trumpeting how the Democratic Party is, they're united, they're drawing together, they're putting aside their differences, they're pushing this unity thing as hard as they can. Most of it's a manufactured fraud, and for most of the people on the ground there, they understand the Democratic version of unity is kicking out all opposing views and dissent of any kind. You will stand behind the candidate we give you. Yeah. And it's getting pretty ugly out there. Apparently, the police outside the Democratic National Convention have resorted to a free speech cage. They have literally set up a fenced-off area where critics of Hillary, supporters of Bernie Sanders, are going to be held to make sure they cannot get into the convention and make rude sounds at Hillary during her acceptance speech. And if Hillary treats free speech like this during her campaign, imagine what she would do as president. So this left the Democrats with a big problem. There's a lot of empty seats in there. And that looks bad on the camera. This is the coronation of the Empress Hillary. They should be full to overflowing. So what are they doing? They're advertising for seat fillers. And we actually posted a link to an actual ad. They're hiring people at $10 an hour. That's less than minimum wage, by the way. To just go on in and sit in the seats and applaud when they're directed to. For 6 hours. And that's a lot of money. Now, the convention seating runs about 20,000. We figure about half of those are Hillary's people. So that's 10,000 empty seats they're having to fill for 6 hours at $10 each times 6. That's a lot of money. And one of Bernie Sanders' delegates was actually talking to a professional seat filler and got him to admit, yeah, they replied to the ad. They're being paid to be there. It's a tough economy. Nobody's got work. It's very easy to get people to come on in and just sit there and applaud the Empress. It's a fake. It's all a fake. Now, as you know, the spin coming out of the DNC email leak is it's all a plot by Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Oh, poor Hillary, she's the victim. The boys are ganging up on her again, and you shouldn't even bother reading those DNC emails, or you're a Russian stooge. And the story of how that came about is really quite telling, because on July 24th, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, Robbie Mook, without naming the source, came on out with this allegation that so-called security experts pointed to Russia as the source of the hack of the DNC's emails. Wouldn't name the sources. Just take my word for it. We wouldn't lie to you. We're Democrats. Now, Mook has revised his statement since then in the face of growing demands. Who exactly has any evidence Russia had anything to do with this? Especially with Julian Assange coming on out and saying, I'm not telling you where we got this, but it wasn't Russia. And Mook is now saying that he only reported it because he had heard it on CNN. That was his authoritative source. CNN said it was being done. It must be so. Now, during his speech yesterday, Donald Trump cracked a joke about Russia having the missing 30,000 emails from Hillary's private email server and how much he hoped Russia would leak them. And, of course, the Democrats and the corporate media seized on this as Donald Trump admitting he was working with Putin. It's an act of treason against the U.S. government for them to be working together. And they're frothing at the mouth trying to connect this. And Donald Trump has come on out and said it was a joke. And they're just trying to seize on it as proof Russia did the hack, that Russia and Donald Trump are working together. They're victimizing poor Hillary, feel sorry for her at the ballot box, all this nonsense. It really is. Now, there's a little bit of a wrinkle you need to pay attention to. Okay, if Russia does have those emails, and according to Guccifer, a lot of people were inside Hillary's server, by treaty, the Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Treaty, signed by the U.S. in Moscow in June of 1999, requires Russia to turn those emails over to American law enforcement. It's not a dastardly plot. It is not treason. If Russia has the emails and turns them over, they are complying with a treaty. And they're rising on a busted flush on this one. I couldn't believe it. This is from the Washington Post. They're already out there pre-selling. By November, Russian hackers could target American voting machines. Harumph, harumph, harumph. And it launches with a flat-out declaration. Russia was behind the hacks at the Democratic National Committee's computer network, which we know they've got no support for whatsoever. And they extrapolate from that forward. Obviously, Russia is going to be interfering with America's elections. Now, first of all, you need to understand, the U.S. government has no business chastising anybody for tinkering in other countries' elections because the CIA has been doing it for decades. But let's go back and remember that Sony Pictures hack, which the same U.S. intelligence agencies that are screaming about Russia now insisted came from North Korea, which at that point had a somewhat higher position on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. And then, of course, they were all humiliated when it turned out to be an internal leak by a disgruntled Sony employee. And one has to wonder if recently assassinated DNC IT worker Seth Rich might have been the true source of the WikiLeaks data. But I digress. And again, WikiLeaks, without identifying their sources, saying this isn't Russia. The most amazing thing, however, is the Washington Post has all of a sudden discovered that it's possible to cheat American elections. But apparently only so long as they can use it to demonize Russia. Now, anybody who's been to blackboxvoting.org or seen that HBO documentary, Hacking Democracy, knows the entire U.S. election system is designed to be a cesspool of fraud. And we do not need to look at Putin to find out who will be cheating this November. Now, as I mentioned before, there's this report by Election Justice USA that determined 184 delegates that should have gone to Bernie Sanders were instead delivered to Hillary Clinton. Without that cheating, Bernie would be the Democratic nominee. Then you have that Stanford study, again, where the electronic machines were used, there was a bias towards Hillary Clinton. So why isn't the Washington Post reporting on all the lawsuits filed against the Democratic primaries? It seems to have escaped their notice. Why is the Washington Post engaging in baseless speculations about Russia? And you have to wonder, is somebody setting up a propaganda campaign so that if Trump achieves a landslide victory, too huge for the election riggers to overcome, they'll simply dismiss the entire election saying, oh, well, it was being rigged for Trump by Russia, and therefore we're going to disqualify Donald Trump and Hillary will be the president. And they're out there just screaming about all this hacking of all the electronic voting machines. I have a solution, which amazingly enough seems to have escaped the prostitutes and the correspondents, not to mention the editorial staff over at the Washington Post. Let's ban all electronic voting machines for November. That way the election cannot be hacked by Russia or by someone much closer to home. Now, there's one other factor. They're out there trying to create this link between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And at the same time, they're ignoring that Uranium One deal. That Canadian company was merging with a Russian company. They were coming into the U.S. and buying up uranium resources to mine. And cash was flowing into the Clinton Foundation. At the same time, the State Department worked to make this deal happen. Why isn't the Washington Post reporting on that? At least the New York Times had the guts to go forward with this story. There's a solid link, a corrupted link, between Hillary Clinton and Russia that's very real and demonstrable. But that's being ignored. To sell you this idea that Donald Trump is evil incarnate and Vladimir Putin is the reincarnation of Joseph Stalin and they're going to destroy the world unless we put Hillary Clinton into the White House. Let's take a phone call. John in the Caribbean, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael, yes. I have to point out, just like the email server nonsense and Bill Clinton's executive order, this treaty where Russia is obliged by treaty to hand over information if it involves criminality was signed by Bill Clinton.
Talk about hoisting with your own petard.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, this election cycle, because it's so interesting, shall we say, and is going out all over the Internet, it is just showing how corrupt the whole of American government and society is. We've got Monsanto, we've got the NSA, we've got all these organizations that are the FBI giving Clinton a free pass. How could they possibly do that? But it's on show to the whole world. America is just descended into this ridiculous criminality.
It has, and it's on full display to the American people. Again, we have this coffee mug that we sell in our online store. The fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it. And if there's one positive thing that we got out of the Democratic National Convention this year, it was a slap across the face of the American voter that they're not being listened to anymore, that they're being ignored, that they're being sidelined by party machine politics. And people are not happy about that.
I'm surprised that we aren't quoting Joseph Stalin. It's not the voters that count, it's who counts the votes.
Well, a lot of people have been quoting him on that one because that's exactly what's going on. And we have tangible proof that election fraud has already been taking place during the primaries. And, of course, Hillary is going to be going into November planning to do exactly the same thing because she's sinking in the polls. Donald Trump is pulling ahead. She's in serious, serious trouble, and they're going to hit the panic button.
Well, I think I watched an RT offering this morning. It's called The Siberian Candidate.
Yes.
It was a complete... it was a laugh all the way through. The nonsense that's coming out of the American corporate media. And and the Democratic Party. If it wasn't so serious, it'd be laughable.
Well, it actually is laughable, and what it does indicate is they are in a state of panic over there. Because nothing they're putting out is getting traction with the voters. Donald Trump is pulling ahead in the polls. Even the online polls, which are trying to sell Hillary, are having to admit Donald Trump is pulling ahead rapidly. Hillary is not going to get a post-convention bounce because of all this stuff that came on down. She's in serious, serious trouble, and all of her backers are. And behind that, of course, that entire linked network of corruption, HSBC, the Clinton Foundation, all of it risks being torn down and exposed under a Trump presidency. And that's why his life is in serious danger right now, and I hope his security is taking that seriously.
I think I'd be riding around in a WAP vehicle to make sure that, even RPGs can't get me if I was Mr. Trump.
Well, he can't give the public appearance of being afraid or being paranoid. He does have a tendency to walk out in the open a little more than I'm comfortable with. He's got to understand that he's up against some very powerful forces on a par with those that took down John F. Kennedy or John F. Kennedy Jr. And so he's got to be very, very careful. And I'll even give you a timeline for when I expect them to make an attempt on Trump's life, and that will be before the first scheduled debate between Trump and Hillary. Because Donald Trump will just eat her alive on that stage. She has to.
I don't think there'll ever be a debate because, as you say, Donald Trump will just destroy the woman completely.
Well,
he's got so much ammunition. Evidence.
Hillary can hardly refuse. I mean, this would be the first election in U.S. history without a debate between the candidates for president, and people are going to really say that's it. Something corny is going on here.
I think they've already delayed the first debate, so who knows?
Well, if there is no debate, it's going to work against Hillary and for Trump. Just like Donald Trump is making a big deal of the fact that, he's taking questions from reporters, and Hillary has been ducking reporters' questions for 230 days. Donald Trump had a town hall forum on Reddit last night. Something like 10,000 questions came on through. And, he's making himself accessible to the public and the media, and that's something Hillary dares not do.
Well, I looked at this information where Mr. Trump supposedly actually requested that Russia, if they've got the emails, or anyone, he said, anybody who has these emails, please send them to the FBI to further their investigation.
Oh, yeah, like the FBI is going to do anything with that stuff. Let's see. If you got the emails, dump them on the net somewhere. Send them to WikiLeaks, give them to all the independent media, just let them post and let the American people read them and judge for themselves.
I think the WikiLeaks are being very clever with these leaks. Leaking a little bit at a time, it keeps it in the news and in the news cycle, and I can see them keeping this corruption in the news cycle for weeks and weeks, and until it really sinks into the American people's consciousness.
Well, they're definitely playing the media with that, but I think last night's release of the voicemail is actually going to backfire on them. First of all, because there wasn't really anything of interest in it, and they're obviously somebody is tapping phones. I don't think it was a good release. It didn't really convey any important information.
Serious.
Yeah, and Assange was saying the next release will result in an indictment. This obviously wasn't it. So who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, but I mean, it's becoming serious when the American media and the Democrats are accusing foreign nation of interfering in their election cycle, when America's been doing that since the end of the Second World War.
Absolutely. I mean, there is so much projection going on where, the government and Hillary and the Democrats are trying to say, oh, no, we're fine. What you think we've been doing, actually, it's the Republicans and it's Donald Trump, and it's called projection. And that's exactly what's going on. and they're back to rehashing all the old stories. Oh, it's a vast right-wing conspiracy. It's Hillary haters. It's blah, blah, blah. More about that when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Thank you very much for the phone call, John, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And there is no question Hillary is in serious, serious trouble. Her campaign right now seems to be degrading, deteriorating, down to simply trying to find some way to make the American people hate Donald Trump more than they hate her. And she's got such a head start down that reasons to hate. And they're trying to negate that as well. Now, there's an interesting little article talking about the double standards in the corporate media. This is over at softwar.net, called DNC Titanic. You know, ding, ding, Captain, we have a WikiLeaks. And they're pointing out, when Hillary Clinton sent classified emails from her unsecure personal server, lied and got caught, everybody does it, no big deal. When thousands of emails and documents suddenly disappeared from the IRS on hard drives that were eaten by Lois Lerner's dog, nothing to see, not important. When the CIA director got his email hacked by a teenager who smokes pot every day, the media stories were, oh wow, the guy smokes pot. But on the unproven claim that Russia hacked the DNC and showed the party to be a bunch of frat boys and sorority girls cheating Bernie Sanders out of the nomination, all of a sudden it's a crisis, national security breach, it's time to go to war, those evil Russians. And they're calling out the corporate media's prostitutes and correspondents, as they deserve to be. Now, it's not just confined to the United States. What they're trying to do is find some way to get everybody to hate Donald Trump on the basis of these made-up myths and legends, and find some way to convince everybody that it's okay to support Hillary despite all that she's done. And I almost couldn't believe this story over in the Daily Mail. Why is Hillary so unpopular? Psychologists explain the science behind Clinton's struggle to win over voters. And they go on in about research from the Human Cooperation Laboratory at Yale University is out there saying Trump is popular because he acts like he's outside the system. They go on to a long thing, but basically this is what it is. The latest pathetic desperation on the cusp of madness spin is if you don't support Hillary, there may be something mentally wrong with you. Of course, to the psychiatric industry, everything's a mental illness for which they have a pill they will sell you. But I digress. According to these researchers, you shouldn't pay attention to the shady cattle futures trading or Whitewater or Flowerwood or Castle Grande, the CIA cocaine running through Mena, Arkansas while Bill was governor, trained as ADFA, defaming all of Bill's sex assault victims, the Lost Roselaw film firm billing records, travel office firings to hand the contract to Hollywood friends, sending sensitive technology to China for donations to Bill's reelection, the murder of Vince Foster, the murder of Ron Brown, Hillary Care, using the IRS against their enemies, looting the White House of furniture when they left, illegally obtaining FBI files on their enemies, lying about sniper fire in Bosnia, Benghazi, the felony violations of Title 18 from Hillary's private email server, the pay-to-play Clinton Foundation, and the rigging of the Democratic primaries to steal the nomination from Bernie Sanders. These are just factors people aren't going to be thinking about. The problem is voters are mentally incompetent to objectively select the media-declared best candidate to serve in the Oval Office. I mean, that's really out there. If you're not supporting Hillary Clinton, you're mentally ill. How Soviet Union can you get? Meanwhile, another one they're dusting off over at Patriot News Daily. Liberals have an explanation for Hillary's critics. It's just sexism. They hate her because she's a woman. And she's already out there. She's trying to play the victim. I'm a victim. I'm helpless and weak to the patriarchy. That's why you've got to give me the keys to the nuclear weapons. It's amazing. About the only good thing that can be said is that Hillary Clinton does believe in recycling, because she's recycling all the same crud that they have been using to dodge the blame for their illegal criminal actions all these years. It's a vast right-wing conspiracy. Oh, it's coulda, shoulda, woulda. That's last week's news. On and on and on. And people are catching on to it. It's happened way too many times. Latest Los Angeles Times poll, and remember, the Los Angeles Times is in favor of Hillary. Trump, 47. Hillary Clinton, 40. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, before we went on the break, we were mentioning that the latest Los Angeles Times poll, and the Los Angeles Times is very pro-Hillary. Their poll is Trump 47 to Hillary 40. 7-point spread. And the reality is, over the last 2 weeks, Donald Trump has seen an average gain of 17 points on the upside. Now you know why Hillary's people are absolutely panicking. Nancy Pelosi is, they're down to name-calling now. Along with that, you're mentally ill if you vote for Donald Trump and all the rest. You're sexist, you're a woman hater. Nancy Pelosi is now out there saying Trump voters are dumb, racist, and homophobic. You can almost see her on the verge of tears, And your mother dresses you funny, and your dog smells awful, and you're ugly people because you won't vote for the people we want you to vote for. I want to see her fall down on the ground and kick and scream and throw an absolute tantrum. Just cry. You're being mean to me by not voting for Hillary. Time magazine is out there on this attempt to link Trump and Russia. This has all the earmarks of what is called a full court press in public relations terms. Just massive saturation. And Time is going with this story about how Donald Trump made the U.S. a target for Russia's new brand of warfare. That cyber warfare, those evil Russians. They've been developing this, and now Trump's given them an excuse to... Time did not allow comments on this article, and for a very good reason, because I would have said, hey, would you please remember just who created Stuxnet and started all this destructive cyber war stuff? It's amazing. Now, Julian Assange is out there saying that there is more to come, and they are playing the media very brilliantly, little bit at a time, little bit at a time, little bit at a time, little bit at a time. I'm sure that the Hillary people would actually be rather happy if it all came out now, and then they could sort of work on driving it from the public memory between now and November. But Assange isn't going to do that. Now, unfortunately, as I mentioned to John from Barbados, I think there was a bit of a misstep with these DNC voicemails. And I'm sure it rattled a lot of people over at the DNC that even their voicemails are out there. But there wasn't really anything I could see in any of these emails that was substantive. In fact, my impression is the voicemails are just from one single telephone used by a person named Andrew. And most of the calls are, Andrew, please call me back. I'm calling from the ambassador. And this one lady who kept calling in over and over again saying, you've got to stop Bernie Sanders. He's got way too much influence. So, we'll see what's going on. Assange was promising something that would lead to an indictment. This is clearly not it. Okay. Moving right along. For 3 days in a row now, the movie Clinton Cash has been #1 on Facebook. It's spreading all over the place. I probably got about 6 emails today saying you got to see this movie, which, by the way, is on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com right now. It is a classic example of something going viral. And everybody who watches this movie, which is based on that New York Times bestseller, they're just stunned at how much the Clintons have been able to get away with over the decades. Online views have cleared well over 1 million. I don't even think there's a way that anybody can actually keep track, because a lot of people are copying off local copies of this out of fear that it may get taken offline somehow. Now, right now, Dinesh D'Souza's Hillary's America is now the top grossing documentary of 2016. This is another movie about Hillary. And remember, we were reporting yesterday down in Florida, some Democratic politician is trying to get the theaters to voluntarily pull this movie from screening out of fears that it might encourage violence against Democratic politicians. Well, if you're worried about a negative reaction from the voters, don't cheat the voters. Seems like common sense to me. Okay, if you are trying to call into our radio show, I have just now been informed we are having some difficulties with the 800 line. John was able to call into us over Skype, but if you're trying to reach the show and you can't get through, that's the reason. And again, you know, profuse apologies from that giant mutant hamster in the wire wheel hooked to that generator. And I assume that once the phone lines are working, that the control room will let me know that they're back on. Okay. Now, during Obama's Democratic National Convention speech, there were people in the audience shouting, "No on TPP, no on TPP." Because despite Hillary Clinton's claims to oppose it, support for these transoceanic, transglobal, so-called free trade agreements. That's part of the Democratic platform. And by the way, if it's really free trade, you wouldn't need an agreement, would you? These so-called free trade agreements are very restrictive. You're allowed to freely trade the products coming from the giant corporations. Now, Bernie supporters were booing and chanting "No more wars," while Leon Panetta got up there to describe what an amazing war President Hillary Clinton will be. He's up there with her war credentials, and, you know, she'll be a strong leader who will send your children off to die bloody, horrible deaths for the greater glory of the American empire, victory or death, blah, 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 blah. And then he kind of shot himself in the foot with the claim that Hillary Clinton masterminded the killing of Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad. And that was not a good thing to do, because anybody who's been paying attention knows the real Osama bin Laden died of Marfan syndrome in late 2001, and the guy they got at Abbottabad wasn't him. That's why they took no pictures, no video, dumped the body in the ocean, and just flooded the internet with these hastily done, very poorly done fake photos that were ripped to shreds in a matter of an egg timer by this retired visual effects expert who lives on the island of Oahu. So he's out there. Hillary masterminded the killing of Osama bin Laden, and that was a complete hoax and a fraud. He's committing a fraud based on another fraud, based on another fraud. Now, when Tim Kaine was getting up there to have his name officially put into nomination as vice president, the floor of the convention started calling for a roll call vote. And apparently the Democratic National Committee organizers simply cranked up the music to the maximum level to drown out the dissenters so they couldn't be heard. Now, it's estimated that at top volume, the sound system they have at that Democratic National Convention can reach 140 decibels. This is louder than a jet aircraft on takeoff and well above the level of permanent damage to the ears. But that's how they're going to do it. They're not saying things we like. Turn up the music. Anyway. Well, Bernie Sanders is on his way back to Vermont. As an independent, he has now officially left the Democratic Party. Bernie has left the building. And I imagine he's probably kicking himself for not having allowed a discussion on that email server issue in that first debate. Because whatever he thought he was going to get out of being nice to Hillary Clinton, he got nothing. He's back to status quo ante. And his supporters are feeling burned. So let's talk about the war zones now. Emphasis on the plural. Because much of the U.S. interdiction force is still trapped on the ground in Turkey at the Incirlik Air Base, Syrian forces backed by Russian air assets are making major, major gains. And they've all but encircled Aleppo. They've regained control of a strategic oil pipeline, taken it back from ISIS. That's going to make Erdogan very, very unhappy because, remember, he had that little deal. He was buying stolen Syrian oil from ISIS, and then his son was reselling it to other companies. They were making money hand over fist from this deal. Now, Syrian helicopters are now flying over the remaining rebel areas, dropping leaflets saying, if you're thinking about surrendering, now would be a good time to do it. Just put down your weapons, cooperate with the Syrian army, and Assad is talking about a blanket pardon for all Syrians who put their weapons down and surrender. And they might just take him up on it. They can't be feeling very good right now, surrounded with their supply lines cut off, and their sponsors, the United States, paralyzed over an encircling. Vladimir Putin is reinforcing this message of surrender and be safe, promising the rebel fighters a safe way out, a corridor by which they can exit Syria if they choose to do so. Now, apparently over at the United Nations, there was another discussion about what's been going on in Syria, and Samantha Powers was kind of flailing around and thrashing, trying to explain why it is that U.S. planes kept missing the ISIS and Al-Qaeda and bombing hundreds of civilians and civilian infrastructure. And she tried to evade it by saying, well, we're talking about civil society groups. And apparently she was so poorly dressed, people were laughing at her. She looked like a refugee from the 60s hippie communes, from Woodstock. Did not present a very respectable face of the U.S. government in action. Meanwhile, because of the failed coup d'etat against Erdogan, Turkey is swiftly moving into the Russian sphere of influence. Turkish-Russian rapprochement turbocharged by the coup attempt. And Erdogan is going to be meeting with Putin the first week in August. And they're already talking about ending all sanctions, increased trade, oil pipelines. This has been a major foreign policy disaster for the United States government. And a reminder, handing top government positions to people with fat wallets does not, for good policy, necessarily make. Now, Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, is basically saying that as long as NATO continues to fortify the border with Russia with more troops and more weapons, Russia will be forced to counter that by deploying more of their military down to Crimea and northern Caucasus. And he's pointing out this is not Russian aggression. This is a response to Western aggression. And yes, it is, and we all know that it is. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Japan are shaking hands on greater military cooperation down in the South China Sea just one day after John Kerry was out there saying, well, we're really trying to avoid a confrontation with China over these islands. We're just sailing our warships really close to their territory for freedom of navigation exercises. And you shouldn't read too much into the fact that we have all these major weapons poised off your shore. Really, if you react to our weapons, then you're being the aggressor. Same tactic they're trying to use with Russia. Unfortunately, North Korea is out there flapping their gums again, saying that the U.S. has crossed a red line, primarily with the deployment of THAAD in South Korea. And North Korea's top diplomat for U.S. affairs, quoted in the Associated Press, is saying relations between the U.S. and the North Korea are, in fact, on a war footing. And I'm sure the people over in Washington, D.C. are delighted to hear that, because that's what they need. They need a war. They don't even care who with anymore. If they could get a penguin to commit a terror attack, they'd declare war on Antarctica. The U.S. government needs a war in the hope that you, the American people, out of a misplaced sense of patriotic duty, will forget all about the crimes and the corruption and the taxes and the decayed infrastructure and the spying and the Obamacare, and you'll throw a snappy salute at that flag and fling what's left of your money and your babies onto the designated enemy's bayonets. Because that's what worked before. Every time the U.S. gets into a serious economic mess, they look to war to get out of it. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. Look how many countries the United States has invaded, drone struck, or tried to overthrow. The pattern is clear. The problem is, it's a very different world from the early 1900s or the 1940s. People are much more sophisticated. They're much more aware of government deception leading to war. And I think starting a war that I don't think the U.S. can win, even with nuclear weapons, is actually going to be counterproductive. They're not going to have wide-based support among the American people. Because the American people understand the U.S. government is trying to start a war to save their own sorry rear ends and to plunge us into another century of debt to those private central banks. Now, Tim Kaine, Hillary's running mate, is among 36 senators seeking an additional $320 million for Israeli missile defense systems. You know, those Iron Dome rockets that can't hit those Palestinian bottle rockets on the way in? Tim Kaine wants to take more of your money and give it to Israel to buy more of those. Senator Lindsey Graham is out there saying, this is no time to nickel and dime Israel. We're just going to nickel and dime the American people in order to pay for it all. But there's a real question behind there that it's time that we all asked. First of all, for all the money that we have given to Israel, what do we get back for it? We get a handout and a request for more money. And the reality is, Israel's economy is far better than most of the countries in the European Union. And yet constantly they're demanding money from everybody around them. Now, in theory, Israel was founded to be an independent safe haven for the Jewish people, which sounds like a good idea. But when you look at how Israel is constantly sponging money off of everybody else on the planet, you can hardly call them independent. And it is the actions of Israel's government that are making the world a far more dangerous place for the Jewish people. And even the Jewish people are starting to pick up on that. It is a huge amount of money. We've given Israel more than 6 times the cost of the Apollo moon program. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about all this money that is flowing out of the United States taxpayers' pockets into Israel. And for why? Israel has a very strong economy, or at least with all that the money is pouring in there, it does. It has a very high standard of living. Their economy is much more solid than most of the European Union nations. And now they're talking about giving them even more to buy weapons and things to threaten their neighbors with. The American taxpayer has been forced to give Israel at least 6 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program. And we certainly haven't gotten a giant leap for mankind out of all that money, or even an updated version of Velcro. All we get back is, give us more money and you're an anti-Semite if you don't. And I would hope, and I'm starting to see indications of, there's going to be a serious anti-incumbency fever in the November elections. And it's time to get these Israel firsters out of our government, because it's supposed to be our government, not Israel's. Now, Israel has taken advantage of the circus over at the Democratic National Convention and all these false flag terror attacks all over Europe to do a lot of things that normally would be criticized by the world. They've gone on another binge of demolishing Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem, which according to the United Nations is supposed to be Palestinian land. Just yesterday, Israeli forces opened fire on Gaza fishermen who were just fishing, arrested 2 of them, and confiscated their fishing boats. And apparently Israel has announced they're going to annex more of Syria's Golan territory because they need a safe zone. Oh, horror of horrors, we don't feel safe unless we have more land between us and them. And by the way, that's a scam they've been using against the Palestinians for years. We're going to take this land for a safe zone. And then Israel builds in the safe zone. And then they say, oh, well, we need a new safe zone. And they grab more land. bit by bit by bit by bit by bit. And that's why the map of Palestine today is just this fragmented collection of isolated islands. If you look at the maps of Israel and Palestine for the last 60 years, it's very obvious who is wiping who off the map. All right, let's talk about the economy here a little bit. Deutsche Bank profits plunged 98%. That's even worse than the 96 we had the other day. The outlook for the world's riskiest bank darkens. And we know Deutsche Bank has had a lot of problems with exposure for fraud, a lot of very strange deaths among some of their executives who were involved in some of these areas where the fraud was taking place. But the real issue has to do with the derivatives exposure, and it is huge. We got to take a break for our top of the hour station identification, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and we're still working on getting our phone lines back up and running. And as soon as they are, I will announce that, and then you can call on in with all these questions you're saving up to ask me. Apparently, Hillary's people have found one poll where she's still ahead up in Pennsylvania, and they're trying to turn it into headline news. Hillary Clinton has a lead over Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. That's it. Donald Trump is finished. He's over. And again, you need to understand that those who are getting ready to rig an election have to rig the polls ahead of time so that the results don't come across as a surprise. And there are two kinds of polls in the polling industry, the internal and the external. The internal polls are never published, and they are designed to actually measure what people are thinking. The external polls are the ones that are engineered for public consumption in the media. And those are the ones, they're not designed to measure public opinion. They're designed to try and sway public opinion. 9 out of 10 Americans think you should rub blue mud into your navel. And we have a sale on blue mud down there at our local store. So we're talking about Deutsche Bank. And Deutsche Bank, along with so many of these other large banks, has been caught in fraud. HSBC was laundering drug money, that whole Panama Papers situation, the Clinton Foundation. It's one giant network of corruption. And Deutsche Bank is in serious, serious trouble. And the real problem is, again, goes back to economic globalism and those derivatives. Because the exposure in derivatives from Deutsche Bank alone is 35 trillion pounds. And if Deutsche Bank were to implode and those derivatives activated, it could bring the entire global system down. Now you need to remember, every private central bank is operating as a pyramid scheme. There has to be constant new borrowers to allow the creation of new money, part of which is siphoned off to pay the interest on the old money. But it is a pyramid scheme because you need wider and wider groups of new young borrowers. You know, end all scholarships, make them borrow the money for college, make them borrow the money for this and that. It's amazing. Somebody in my economic circumstances, how many letters I get, you're pre-approved for this and that. And I got a robocall the other day. We're pre-approved for a $250,000 loan for our business. Yeah, sure, we'll take it. Don't have a chance in heck of ever paying it back. But that's how desperate they're getting out there. But all pyramid schemes eventually collapse when they run out of new people to come in on the bottom. And that's exactly what's happening. The world is too deep in debt. Nobody wants to borrow any more money. Governments can't borrow any more money. And it's going to come crashing down. And it is going to be global. And the one thing everybody needs to be ready to do is to stand up and say, as we rebuild the global economy, no more private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. We go back to the economic system that made the United States an economic powerhouse at its birth. Government-issued, value-based currency spent into circulation by the government to buy what the government needs, flowing through commerce without accruing interest, and taxed back in the same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. It is a system that serves the people. It is a system that serves the nation as a whole. It is a public currency handled as a public utility. And the private bankers hate it with a passion because they honestly believe that the entire global economy should run on pieces of paper and ink borrowed at interest from them. And they've assassinated world leaders and started wars to keep this little enslavement system going for the last 300 years. And it may be about to implode. Deutsche Bank is not the only bank in trouble. Lloyds Bank is cutting 200 branches and letting go 3,000 people. Singapore, their layoffs have hit a 7-year high. It's all coming apart here. But of course, this being an election year in this country, which you're going to hear from the prostitutes and correspondents in the corporate media, is it's all fine, it's all great. Really, if you're jobless, it's your fault. If you're hungry and homeless, it's all your fault. It's not our fault. We're the government. We never do anything wrong. And the bankers, they're just such sweet, lovable people. We could never question them, even when they're caught laundering drug money. Now, if you're like me, you probably would like to get a new or newer car. I'm driving a 17-year-old Honda, which I love, by the way. It's showing its age, but it's a great car. And if you watch the TV commercials for car companies, I mean, the prices are way down. The lease payments are way down. It's just amazing. If anybody actually had any money, this would be a great time to get into a new car. But it's not working, even with the lowered prices. Ford stock has plunged, because Ford has basically come on out saying we're not going to see any growth. The auto industry has plateaued. Actually, it wasn't plateaued. It's in a canyon. What they're saying is they can't get it back out. Yet another warning is coming from what's being called the restaurant recession, where fewer and fewer people are dining out. And that is starting to roll up that whole sector of the restaurants and their supply chains and all of the ancillary businesses that go with that. And yeah, people can't afford to go out as much as they used to. And there's another factor as well. We know that as restaurants struggle to keep their books balanced, a lot of them are starting to use more and more fillers in their food, to the point where you can actually taste it. And it doesn't even taste like real food anymore. And people who want to eat healthy are saying, I'm going to stay home and cook. At least I know what's on that plate. But we're showing all the signs of a serious economic downturn that's coming. They're trying to hold it off as long as they can to keep the incumbents elected in November. And then after that, if it hasn't collapsed before then, it will shortly thereafter. Maybe they'll crash it and hand it to President Trump, let him deal with it. And they've done that once before. A lot of people thought Herbert Hoover was to blame for the Great Depression, but Herbert Hoover did not create the Great Depression. It was created for him. Let's see, French wine losses 7.9%, global food prices up 4.2%. Part of it's economic. Part of it is the fact that this has been a cooler growing season for much of the Northern Hemisphere. Shell profits are plummeting 70% as tumbling oil prices bite. It's a mess out there. So let's get back to Obamacare. What's going on over there? I mean, more and more exchanges are bailing on them. It's a failed concept. And apparently there's been a problem with the Obamacare Medicaid costs, which have soared 49% above the projections. Talk about missing the mark. They had a calculation for what Medicaid and Obamacare was going to cost, 49% higher. And finally, an article over an Investment Watch blog that really cuts to the chase here. If everything is so great, according to the corporate media, why do 2/3 of Americans say the country is on the wrong track? And certainly everybody I talk to around here, even if they're not politically aware, even if they're still drinking the Kool-Aid from the corporate media, they all know something has gone horribly wrong with this country. And they may not know what it is, but if they ask you, you can educate them and say, we're in this mess going back to, and just very slowly, patiently, fill them in with the real history of what's been going on in this country. All right, let's talk about immigration and the refugee crisis. It is getting very tense over there in Germany. Following some of the attacks and the terror attacks and the Munich shooting, which may have been a false flag because of the bizarre circumstance of the exact same photographer being at Munich that was down in Nice, and he's married to a former member of Israeli intelligence. That was kind of a big giveaway on that one. But German armed police just smashed their way into a mosque and raided the homes of a group which are accused of radicalizing Muslims and preparing them for jihad. Well, why are all these radicalized Muslims in Germany preparing for jihad? Well, because Merkel opened up that border and let them in. Merkel is now admitting the European Union is being ravaged by terror, but says Germany should welcome more refugees. Can you see how these two agendas have collided head on? We need to blend all the people of the world together into one formless mass here. And yes, it's causing problems and sexual assaults and stabbings and axings and all the rest of the stuff. But we got to keep on going because we serve this higher, nobler purpose of a one world government, and no sacrifice by other people is too great to pay for that new world order. Merkel will not survive her next election. She is that hated by her people. Now then, we are still seeing a concerted effort to try and rebrand the police in this country as the new victim class. Oh, these poor police, they're being shot by snipers, probably working for the government. Oh, we've got to remilitarize them. And left out of that discussion, the reason they're not getting traction is because the perception of the police by the American public is very negative. And finding actual numbers has been very, very difficult because they're not numbers the government wants you to know. But according to this article over in Russia Today, there was a study done of all the incidents of police brutality in the year 2012, and it came out that in that 1 year only, over 55,000 innocent Americans were either injured or killed by the U.S. police. Fatal firearms wounds, excessive use of tasers, they are not non-lethal despite the advertising. And it paints a picture of a police force that, through training or through prescription antidepressants, has become more and more brutal. Now, this goes with another article. This came out of Time, no less. The most dangerous jobs in America, because they're out there trying to convince you that police officers, it's the most dangerous job there, and that's why we've got to take care of them. And actually, as it turns out, no, on a per capita basis, being a police officer is not the most dangerous job. In fact, it's 15th. The most dangerous job in America is being a logging worker. Fishing workers is second. Aircraft pilots and flight engineers are third. Roofers are fourth. Garbage collectors are fifth. Farmers, ranchers are sixth. Structural iron and steel workers seventh. Drivers, sales workers, and truck drivers eighth. Electrical power installers ninth. Taxi drivers and chauffeurs are 10th. First-line supervisors of construction trades are 11th. Construction laborers are 12th. First-line supervisors of landscaping and lawn service are 13th. Maintenance repair workers 14th. And then we get to police. And during the period of this study, there were 97 police officers killed. This was less than half the number of construction workers. Tiny fraction of the number of truck drivers who were killed. Same thing, less than farmers, less than half of farmers. The police aren't in this incredibly dangerous job. They're down in the middle. But they're trying to rebrand them as, the new victim class. And when they beat the crud out of you and steal all your money in civil forfeiture, you should be more understanding and forgiving. I don't think so. Now, as you know, there is still a lingering stink over the U.S. government's use of torture to find the location of Saddam's nuclear weapons, which never existed as it turned out. And there is a trial going on right now regarding a detainee at Gitmo, Ammar al-Baluchi. And the trial is yet to begin down at Guantanamo Bay in this military trial, this kangaroo court. There's a little bit of a problem because one specific piece of evidence has vanished, and that is this secret CIA black site where most of these defendants were tortured. Now, the judge had actually issued a protective order. These are evidence in an ongoing case, and despite that court order, the site has basically been bulldozed. Imagine that. We've been talking about the Veterans Administration, rather. We were talking about this huge scandal where they're just neglecting our returned wounded veterans. It's almost like there's an official policy of ignore them until they die and save a few bucks. But the VA officials themselves are having a heck of a time. We were talking about this huge amount of money they're spending on artwork for their offices. And then back in 2011, there was this big scandal. I don't know if most people remember it or not. But the VA had claimed to spend $20 million on conferences for all the VA people to go to these big hotels and have a fun old time in conferences. And $20 million was seen as a lot of money. It later came out it had actually been $100 million. They were embarrassed to admit how much they were spending on their little conferences and vacations, which amounts to the same thing. And that's a slap in the face to all of our serving veterans. And I want to reiterate something, and I've said it before, and I'm sorry if I'm boring you with this. Regardless of whether you support the wars or not, and I don't, we as a nation do owe a debt of honor to all those who put on that uniform and obeyed their orders and paid a heavy price for it. Now, sadly, we demanded the government that profited from these wars to spend some of that profit to care for those who were permanently injured or even temporarily wounded, get them back to being healthy. And we're finding out it's not happening. Some of these veterans literally died waiting for their first appointment with a VA doctor. And then we find out the VA leadership is just spending money like crazy on themselves. Those of you who are parents of military age or soon-to-be military age children, you ought to tell your kids this. Because they're going to get the spiel from the recruiters and, special assemblies at their schools about how great the military is. And they need to learn the other side of it, the dark side, the side that the recruiters won't mention. And one more thing you ought to tell them. Any promises made by a recruiter to get that kid to sign that contract are not legally enforceable. This has come down from numerous court cases. That recruiter can promise your kid they're going to go to medical school, and they could wind up peeling potatoes for their entire time in the military. There's nothing they can do about it. The recruiters are essentially allowed to tell your kid anything to get that signature on that contract. Now then, Brad Pitt has his own foundation called the Make It Right Foundation, and it's run into a snag. One of their projects that they undertook followed Hurricane Katrina, and they went on in to New Orleans. They were up in Manheim Park, Kansas City, trying to build new homes for those who'd lost their homes in Hurricane Katrina. And apparently, construction, which was supposed to have started in May of 2015, hasn't even started. And apparently a number of senior staff members, including the top architect, have quit the project. And people are starting to wonder what's going on. Where did all the money go? Is it shades of Haiti again? Now, getting into the world of computer... Actually, we're coming up on a commercial break here. And I'm going to try and find out what the heck is going on with the phone lines, because I know you want to call on in. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently we're still not able to get our phone system working. So how wonderful to be living in a fascist dictatorship where all the equipment breaks down all the time. Anyway, speaking of equipment breaking down, the one part that seems to be working really well, of course, continues to be the malware. And apparently there is a new issue out there that you need to be aware of. There is a banking Trojan that is being distributed using PayPal. And hackers are using PayPal to distribute what is called the Teutonic Banking Trojan. This is a variant of Zeus, which apparently was written by the same people who did Stuxnet, meaning it's state-sponsored. And the emails are legitimate, and they're not blocked by anti-spam or antivirus software because they're coming in via genuine PayPal accounts. And the sender does not appear to be faked. The spam is generated by registering with PayPal or using a stolen account and then using the portal to request money. And, of course, the NSA won't do anything about it. If this new Trojan is a variant of Zeus, then this is another indication that all of this ransomware and malware and the rest of it is just another mechanism for a desperately broke and in-debt government to loot the general population with. Because you have to understand this malware is a serious problem. It is a huge loss not only of wealth, but of productivity, because people are spending time trying to deal with all of these cyber threats, and that takes time away from doing whatever it is that they do to actually earn money. And our economy really cannot afford that. And you would think that the government would view that as a threat, but they don't act like it, do they? They do not act like it. Now, I've mentioned before that as much as I love computers, and I don't love them as much as I used to when I was a kid, that I think it's gotten a little decadent, that we computerize things that really don't need to be computerized. Computerized coffee pot, the Internet of Things. I think it's a ridiculous idea. Outside of this office, my lifestyle is going decidedly low-tech. I don't have one of those fancy coffee things anymore. I just have a simple coffee press. I don't need a clock. I don't need a timer. And here's a good example of that. There is, for pets out there, something called the PetNet Smart Feeder. This is an Internet-connected pet feeding system where you go onto their servers and you schedule when the pets are supposed to be fed. And apparently the server has had issues leaving the animals in the homes using this thing to go hungry. I think this is an illustration that we've gone way, way too far with trying to put computers into everything that we own. Now, over in Flint, Michigan, as you know, they had that horrible problem with the drinking water. And their response was to point the finger of blame and deny responsibility and act all huffy about it. But it was a decision made to save money at the expense of the health of the people of Flint, Michigan, and as it turned out, a lot of other cities across America. Well, apparently the city of Flint has now run out of chlorine to treat that city water. They haven't done anything to fix the actual problem. Everybody just said use a filter and use chlorine. Now they've run out of chlorine. The Environmental Protection Agency is worried about this, of course. We're going to put on our best worried expression and look really worried for the press cameras. And the people of Flint, Michigan will go on drinking dangerous water. And I'm sure that the TV channels in Flint, Michigan are just filled with commercials selling bottled water. Get this plastic bottle with clean drinking water that used to come out of your faucets, but no more, because clean water out of the faucets is a threat to corporate profits, and that's why we took it away from you. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and just some headlines that are coming on in. We were talking before about this DNC IT worker. This database employee was shot down literally in the streets of Washington, D.C. And I had suggested that one possible motive for his assassination is that he, rather than Russia, was the source of the DNC email leak to WikiLeaks. There's another point of view that's being put out over at governmentslaves.info. There is apparently a report that this gentleman, Seth, was set to testify against Hillary over election fraud during the Democratic primary season, which we now know was actually going on. So it is a crooked election. And if we had a fair and honest government, or even just a fair and honest Democratic Party, they would take the nomination away from Hillary Clinton and give it to Bernie Sanders, because he did win the popular vote. Now, Bernie Sanders supporters are continuing their demand to eliminate the superdelegates. And what's really interesting, the superdelegates, how they came to be. Everybody say, why are they these superdelegates? And it actually goes back to Richard Nixon's re-election and the committee to re-elect the president. And what happened was all of the Democratic front-runners that could have beaten Richard Nixon seemed to self-destruct. And when the convention finally happened, George McGovern got the nomination. And Richard Nixon was able to just roll right over him. So the Democratic National Committee got together and said, we need a mechanism where we can override the will of the people and put forward a better candidate. And that's where that whole superdelegate thing was invented. Of course, they did all of this before it was exposed that Richard Nixon's dirty tricks team had been sabotaging all those other Democratic candidates to leave the field only for George McGovern to win. So the superdelegates wouldn't have addressed that problem. The problem was election fraud, dirty tricks. But they kept the superdelegates, and then the Republicans took on the same idea, saying, hey, it's more power for us, centralized power and authority, to heck with what the voters want. But it was a bogus solution to a problem that never really existed in the first place. And the superdelegates should be gotten rid of. Because the way this country is supposed to work, you, the American people, pick your candidates. And then you, the American people, vote in the candidate that you want to serve. That's the way it's supposed to work. And along with all of our other rights, First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, the actual process of democracy is being chipped away bit by bit by bit. And it's been going on for a long time. But this year, 2016, is the year when the American people got that ice-cold bucket of water in the face, and they woke up and realized how disenfranchised they really, really are. Because if you have that kind of massive election fraud going on, then you can't know that the people who are the leaders actually represent the will of the people. And we need a zero-tolerance policy on this. Now, my view is very simple. If a government cannot prove beyond all doubt the honesty, accuracy, and fairness of the elections by which they claim authority over we the people, then we the people are neither legally nor morally obligated to obey that government, to pay that government's bills, and certainly not to sacrifice the lives of our children in that government's wars of conquest. It may honestly be said that this nation, for decades, has not had leaders actually elected by the American people. The burden of proof is on them before they grab our money and our children. Now, as I mentioned before, Bernie Sanders has officially quit the Democratic Party. He's back to being an independent. He's on his way back to Vermont. He has a book deal already where he's going to write about his experiences, what happened. And so it's a little something, not much. But again, as I mentioned before, Bernie Sanders, I think, just got a lesson in real politics. Because whatever he thought he was going to gain by dismissing the email scandal in that first debate, whatever he thought he was going to gain by endorsing Hillary Clinton, by trying to get his supporters to come in underneath her and support her, which isn't going to happen, by the way, Sanders got nothing out of it. He got used. He got used and cast aside by Hillary Clinton. And that's the way she treats everybody. Doesn't matter how close you are. Vincent Foster was rumored to be Hillary Clinton's lover in Little Rock, Arkansas. And he still wound up murdered in Fort Marcy Park over that presidential blind trust. So, anyway. Now, we reported yesterday on how the prosecution has dropped all remaining charges against the police officers over the death of Freddie Gray, which has angered the community. And you would think the police officers would be very grateful and ready to put this whole mess behind them, and you would be wrong. The police officers who were involved in the mishandling of Freddie Gray are now going to sue the prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby. I would say quit while you're ahead. Because the fact that the charges were dropped means double jeopardy doesn't apply. Marilyn could bring those charges back and actually really go after you. You're playing with fire on this one. Okay, now then, as I mentioned before, and we're seeing more of it again today, Black Lives Matter has apparently switched sides. They were big Hillary supporters all along. They were out there causing a ruckus and really fanning up this racial tension issue, which Hillary was all too eager to exploit. And all of a sudden, the leaders of Black Lives Matter appear to be switching sides. And it all comes down to that trust issue. And we're looking at this article where the BLM switches sides, saying they're going to take Trump over Hillary any day. Because when Donald Trump says he's going to do something, there's a good probability it's going to get done. And they've come to understand Hillary can say whatever she wants to say, and it's absolutely meaningless. That's her weak spot. That's her Achilles heel. She's been caught lying so many times. She's still out there trying to claim she's opposed to TPP, and yet supporting TPP is part of the Democratic Party platform. That trust issue is where Hillary is vulnerable. Because the one question Hillary's supporters cannot answer is simply this: how do you know Hillary will do what she says she's going to do? Because her track record has been completely the opposite. She says whatever she thinks you want to hear, and then she does what Hillary wants. And that's been a consistent pattern of behavior all along. Nobody can come up with any reason why we should trust anything Hillary says. And that's why they're shifting the focus of their campaign to basically go into attack mode on Donald Trump. It's still July, and already they're into negative campaigning against Donald Trump. They're bringing in that political mud by the tank car load to try and fling at him. And one of the new tactics they're using, I saw it today, the Hillary campaign understands that when they're on the World Wide Web, on any page where there's a comment section, it's going to get loaded up with all kinds of criticisms of Hillary's campaign and its claims. And they don't have enough of the page shills to offset that. So now they're going with this mass email campaign. In fact, let's call it what it is. It's a spam email campaign, where they're sending out all these mass emails, praising Hillary and bashing Donald Trump, and there's really no mechanism to reply, because if you hit reply, the sent address is bogus. And they're mass emailing these things everywhere. They're trying to find a new high ground in the propaganda war against Donald Trump. And again, to the sophisticated American audience who has come to learn over the last 10 years that this sort of thing does go on all the time, it's not going to work. Propaganda only works on a population that is not aware they're being propagandized. We've been told we're being propagandized. They even announced they'd re-legalized it. It used to be illegal to use propaganda on the American people. Now it's fully legal, and the U.S. government now has this office set up to manage propaganda and coordinate with the U.S. media. They are admitting to you they're lying. And there's another article over at Patriot Rising called The DNC's Stinky Strategy. And they're saying, with Hillary's past history, she's got nothing to run on other than to find some way to make the American people more afraid of Donald Trump than they are of Hillary Clinton. And Hillary's got such a head start. So she is in trouble. And we're already hearing word that some of her Wall Street backers are thinking about maybe putting those checkbooks back in their pocket and stop throwing good money after bad. Now, Hillary still has access to who knows how much money that's been laundered through that Clinton Foundation. And in her ambition to sit in that Oval Office, she might spend all of it, which Bill probably wouldn't be all that happy about. But Hillary is obsessed with being president. And that's a dangerous thing to be. When you're that obsessed with something that you'll do anything to get that Oval Office. And then once you have it, she'll be equally ready to do anything with it. And again, look at all the stuff that happened during Bill Clinton's presidency. They're talking about a 2% increase of taxes on the American people as an emergency to refund Social Security. Well, why does Social Security need new funding? Well, because Bill Clinton looted the cash set aside for the baby boomer retirements to make his federal budget surplus. And that's something else we need to remind Americans about, because President Bill Clinton literally embezzled the retirement money of American workers to make a good federal budget surplus, which was then grabbed and spent on a bunch of other stuff. And that's the pattern. Now, getting back to science and health issues. Story coming out of Natural News. Farm workers who detassel corn are sickened by pesticides. Emergency crews called in to decontaminate. Now, unless you're a farm kid, you may not know what I'm talking about. The corn that you see in the supermarket looks very pretty, but that's not the way it comes off the corn stalk. There's the husk around it, the green part, and then there's all these thin yellow filaments at the top, the tassel. And they're not good to eat. They don't look good. So farm workers have to basically strip that stuff off by hand. It's called detasseling the corn. The problem is corn farmers are having to spray more and more pesticide on their crops as the pests become tolerant of the glyphosate. And because the food is now just totally saturated with this stuff, the farm workers are absorbing it through their skin, and they're becoming ill. Remember, the World Health Organization has declared glyphosate a probable carcinogen. They probably would have said definite were it not for Monsanto's lobbying. But these farm workers are getting sick. And they're having to literally decontaminate some of these cornfields because of the huge amounts of glyphosate that have been poured all over them. And this has been going on for a lot of years. It only became an issue when people started saying there seems to be a link between glyphosate and a lot of illnesses. Now, this is a good one. This came out of Natural News as well. Apparently, over in France and Canada, there was a brand of panty liners for women, supposedly organic. And they're having to do a product recall on those because apparently the cotton in those things is being sprayed with glyphosate, and nobody even really knows why. And by the way, a lot of the non-organic panty liners have the same thing. They're spraying that cotton with glyphosate. And nobody knows why, except that women are taking a probable carcinogen and sticking it into their underwear. And it doesn't seem to make sense. And by the way, the produce at your supermarket, that too is sprayed with glyphosate because apparently it helps the food look fresher longer. And all of this, of course, is looked on by the U.S. government without concern because it's making money. It's making money. It's building a new global food monopoly from Monsanto. And the U.S. loves a monopoly, whether it's the Federal Reserve note or food production. And it shows how upside down our society has become, where money and bankers are protected at all costs, and ordinary citizens, we're just here to give them more money, obedience, the lives of our children. They really do treat us like we're livestock, like a herd, human capital. Or to go back to George Bush, the useless eaters. And I think we have a big problem with a government that absolutely has no respect at all for ordinary Americans. The Democratic National Committee just proved that. You know, we're going to do what we're going to do. And if you complain, that you're the problem for complaining over the superdelegates and the election rigging. It's time for you to grow up and realize the world is, run by us and not you. And then when people get upset about it and talk about the Constitution, oh, you're the problem here. We're not the problem for not obeying the Constitution. It's 200 years old. What's wrong with you people? There's a serious attitude problem with our elites in this country. That's one of the reasons why I keep saying that Washington, D.C. is in dire need of an enema. And it's definitely the reason I'm supporting Donald Trump. And it's not because I agree with everything Trump says. I have some issues with some of the things that he has said. And I still think that because he is an outsider, he's still a little naive about what's really been going on inside the corridors of power of this country. But that being said, we have to have a change. We cannot continue on this path. It will mean the absolute destruction of our nation and its transformation into the worst dictatorship in history, followed by the worst war in history. So we're going to take another break for commercials. We're going to try and see what's going on with the telephones here, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And coming up here on the top of the hour, let's just take a look at what's going on here. Very troubling story over at governmentslaves.info. As Trump takes lead, assassination now a distinct possibility, and I know we're all thinking the same thing. But I am very concerned about how much talk about assassination, even as a joke, seems to be appearing in the corporate media. And it almost seems like they're trying to get everybody used to that idea of Donald Trump being assassinated so that when it happens, it isn't shocking and everybody's going to say, yeah, well, we knew this was coming. And not look for the obvious signs of who did it, because they'll find some patsy to do it. They'll blame it on ISIS or Loch Ness Monster, or probably they're over trying to, dig up Lee Harvey Oswald's body. Or John Hinckley Jr. just got let out of the mental home. He's cured. He's fine. We can let him out there. It's amazing. Now, back over at the Democratic National Convention. Some of the activists who were supporting Bernie Sanders are still out there saying the movement needs to stay together, even though Sanders himself seems to have abdicated its leadership. And we're talking about Susan Sarandon and Danny Glover, who are both people I have a huge admiration for and I would love to be able to talk to on the show. Bernie delegate Larry Hamm, and saying the Sanders movement, the Sanderites, need to stay mobilized to push for change. They're out there demanding the end of the superdelegates. And I would not be surprised if all those Democrats who supported Bernie Sanders might actually consider breaking off from the Democratic Party and forming a new third party, which would start out with the same grassroots support and stature as the current GOP and Democrats, and would have to be accorded the same privileges, such as automatic inclusion in all of the state ballots. See, that's one of the ways the system is rigged against third parties. If you're the Republican nominee, you're on all 50 states' ballots automatically. Same thing if you're the Democratic nominee. If you are a third-party nominee for president, you have to mount petition drives in all 50 states to get your name on the ballot. It is a hugely expensive, time-consuming operation, and it's one of the ways that third parties are hobbled and crippled to keep them out of the way of the two entrenched parties. But I think with enough people, the Sanders supporters could do it and say, we're equal in size to the current Democratic Party. We demand the same right that they have. Our candidate is automatically on the ballot. This could be the beginning of the end of the two-party duopoly, which, by the way, was never intended by the Founding Fathers. This country was never set up to have two dominant parties. All parties were supposed to be on an equal footing. Hillary's out there crowing that she's the first female candidate for a major political party. But there have been female candidates for presidents from political parties throughout U.S. history. But they don't count. They're not our parties. We're going to be back after station identification. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and we are still unable to have our phone lines working, which is a little difficult. I'm running out of things to talk about because we always plan for a certain amount of phone calls in the show. Looking at the corporate media, they're all getting ready for the final grand finale of the Democratic National Convention. And amazingly enough, the cameras are panning part of the arena and showing that it's full of the new unified Democratic Party, and somebody is tweeting pictures looking the other way, and they still have a lot of empty seats. I guess they ran out of money for seat fillers, and so they just shoved them over to one side, and all the camera views will come from one angle, which is how you do it. When you need to fill a stadium with extras for a movie that takes place in a sporting ring, you move them around and you frame them in the cameras and so forth and so on. Okay, getting on back to some economic news. OMFIF's David Marsh is now saying that the Bank of Japan is starting to show signs of strain, and they may be suffering major losses as well. This is going to be global when it happens. And it's going to be a bad thing in terms of all the people who are hurt by it, but it will be a good thing in that it will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to bring to an end this fraud, this scam, this system of human enslavement called private central banking. They have been playing this game on the human race for 300 years. It has made them insanely rich. Enough is enough is enough. It's time to bring it to an end. We need public currencies that are managed as public utilities. We don't need any more privatization. Privatization is great for the corporations and the banks, and it's terrible for the people. Now then, apparently over in Fallujah, they've just found another mass grave, 125 bodies. That situation is not going well at all. It does sometimes feel, and we got a call about this yesterday, like the whole world is descending into chaos, and it can be very, very troubling because we all grow up with certain realities that seem unchanging. The national borders, the flag, Disneyland, and at a time when all of our assumptions and beliefs are being torn down, it can make people feel very disconnected, like an identity crisis. And I think a lot of people are going through that right now from the attempt to get rid of Trump at the Republican National Convention and then this absolute fiasco at the Democratic Convention where they've anointed Hillary Clinton even as proof of massive primary fraud has surfaced. And so people probably feeling very, very confused right now and very angry. And like I said, even people who are not students of contemporary politics just have a gut feeling something's gone horribly wrong with this country. And it really, really has. Well, as you know, the International Olympic Committee chose not to give a blanket ban to Russia over allegations of doping but instead left it up to the various international borders for the boards for the individual sports. The U.S. is out there lobbying, still trying to get Russia banned from the upcoming Olympics so that the U.S. can prevail over Russia without having to go through all that nonsense about actual athletic competition, which the U.S. is never really good at. So they're politicizing the Olympics. It's the herald of the new Cold War. And in the end, it might actually be best if Russia was kicked out of the Olympics, at least from the point of view of the health of the Russian athletes themselves, because it's a disaster down there. With Brazil's economy collapsing, they're not able to take care of simple things like water. They've actually had dead bodies floating around some of the venues where some of the water sports are taking place, and the swimmers are literally being told to keep their mouths closed and avoid swallowing the water they're swimming in, because it can be contaminated with all sorts of nasty things. These athletes are not even able to compete in clean, safe environments. It's just absurd. It's just absurd. My concern about the Olympics is that right now the U.S. is desperate for a new false flag to get the war going. And we know the Olympics have been a stage for false flag attacks before, the Munich Olympics, for one. Certainly Hillary needs a false flag right now to get everybody to stop paying attention to those DNC emails, not to mention all of the other scandals from her entire past which are surfacing. And now that Hillary is the official Democratic nominee for president, I'm fully expecting not only Donald Trump, but a lot of other people to really start unloading on her about all the stuff that's been going on in this country for the last 22 years. Well, 25 years. I've been involved for 22. So they need a false flag. They need to get the wars going. Now then, down in Louisiana, actually Acadiana, a priest has been arrested for possessing over 500 images of child pornography, according to the Louisiana State Police. Father Felix David Broussard, a priest at the St. Bernard Roman Catholic Church in Brew Ridge, was arrested today and booked into St. Martin Parish Jail on 500 counts of pornography involving juveniles. Been pastor of the church for 2 years. The parishioners are just shocked. This is not supposed to happen. Apparently, down in Australia, Cardinal George Pell, who is Australia's most senior Catholic cleric, is under police investigation over inappropriate grabbing of young boys at a swimming pool. And this one is a little bit sick. This one's just a little bit sick. Why I Starved and Chained My Son, Pastor Francis. This took place over in Africa, where apparently a pastor decided the best way to punish his son for stealing was to literally chain him to the altar of his church and not feed him for a month. And finally, some of the parishioners reported him to the police, and he was arrested and hauled away. All right, well, my talking points list for today's news is pretty much exhausted. Like I said, I was expecting to be some phone calls, so I'm going to fill the rest of the time by sharing one of my permanent articles with you. And this is an article, it's called Of the Liars, By the Liars, and For the Liars. And like all wars are bankers' wars, I'm just going to read this to you. But I want you to think about what's going on, because one of the big lies you have been raised with is that when a Richard Nixon is exposed, the government and the corporate media react in shock. Oh my goodness, how could this happen? Oh, this is just amazing. No, it isn't. The reality is this kind of stuff is business as usual. Now, back on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, I had the very great honor of being invited to participate in a symposium in New York City, which was a real thrill, because how often do truth activists get to perform off-Broadway? And we were right next to the site of the new World Trade Towers. We were like one street away from that fire station that figured so prominently in the No Day Brothers documentary on 9/11. and it was kind of eerie to walk around and see some of the sites. And the presentation that I gave focused less on 9/11 itself and all the indications of cover-up and fraud, because everybody else was talking about the same thing. My presentation focused on the fact that frauds like this are not unique or rare. They are business as usual. And so when I came back from that, I decided to write this article about how rulers are always going to be lying to the ruled to get what they want. Lies, fraud, and deception are very powerful tools of statecraft, and it's certainly far less expensive to lie to a people than to have to pay an army to stand around them and coerce them into doing what you want. So this is something that I wish our schools taught children, to keep them on their guard, to keep them skeptical. But of course, public school and the corporate media, their job is to convince you that you can trust our government completely. You can trust our corporate media completely. We would never lie to you. All those other countries lie to their people, and we all know it. All countries have lied to their people. But the United States is unique, that we would never do to you what you see with your own eyes other governments doing to their own people. And of course, that's a big steaming pile of USDA choice bovine excrement. The reality is that you all live in an age of lies. Every day of your life, you're literally being drowned in lies. Lies by the government, lies by advertisers, lies by the prostitutes and the correspondents in the corporate media. Truth has apparently become such a valuable commodity that the government is economizing it, to paraphrase Mark Twain. Now, good liars, really good convincing liars, meaning the sociopaths who lie without giving away any tells that they're lying, okay, they lie because they're able to get what they want from people, especially from people who are brainwashed from childhood to believe that telling the truth is what everybody should do. People with a moral compass, people with a conscience, have difficulty lying. They'll flinch, their eyes will go up in ways, and you'll get that sense they're lying. The sociopaths lie without any of those tells. And part of it is because they practice lying all the time, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. In fact, I'm sure they never tell the truth out of concern that people might learn how to tell the difference. But that's the way they go. And I know all of this may seem very, very obvious. But I want to make the point here that all ruling power is the willingness and ability to do things the ruled population may not or have been conditioned to believe they cannot or should not do. That's all power is. You are taught not to steal, yet government reserves to itself the right to steal, obfuscating the theft with words like excise, confiscation, pillage, taxation, conquest, civil forfeiture. You are taught not to murder, yet government reserves to itself the right to murder, obfuscating the killing with words like capital punishment, assassination, termination with extreme prejudice, or war. You are taught not to lie, and it stands to reason that in this area of human behaviors, rulers are as averse to the rules imposed on you as any other. As eager as rulers are to steal and murder, they are equally eager to lie to their people to get what they want. Now, in today's enlightened age of alternative media and global internet communications, lies by rulers are quickly laid bare. And yet most people remain trapped by their belief of what they have been told their rulers are, being honest and trustworthy, and they will greet each new revealed lie with, "What? They lied to us?" And the question ought to be more properly, when don't they lie to us? When was the last time they actually told us the truth about the wars, about the economy, about vaccines, about GMO, about the climate? The historical reality is all rulers lie pretty much all of the time, and each newly revealed lie ought not to be seen as a shocking, isolated incident, but merely a continuation of standard operating bovine excrement. In short, The overwhelming majority of what you are told by your rulers is a lie. And that rare moment of absolute truth, a rare and precious gem worthy of celebration. So let's look at some famous examples from history. The biggest, most enduring lie throughout history is rule by divine right. I am your ruler because I speak for the gods. Whether it's Astarte, Anubis, and Zeus. And this is one of the oldest of frauds perpetrated by self-declared rulers on those they wish to control. Probably goes all the way back to caveman times, when they got tired of simply being the one with the biggest club. They would say, oh, no, I'm your ruler because I understand when the rain comes and when the crops grow and God talks to me, and therefore you have to do what I tell you. And, of course, anybody who demands to see the paperwork on such an absurd deal is burnt at the stake. And I'll give you another example from ancient history. How do you think the pyramids were built? The conventional story is the Hebrew slaves were whipped into doing it, and the archaeological evidence does not support that. Actually, working on the pyramids was considered a great honor by the Egyptian people, and they worked in rotation. And they were well taken care of, because they had to be strong and they had to be fit. But what really drove them to doing all that work was the Pharaoh standing over there and saying, hey, I'm the Pharaoh, and if you will drag this here rock up to the top of that there pyramid, I will fix it so you never really die. You will go into the afterlife. And that was a huge sell, because we're all afraid of dying. Actually, I'm more afraid of staying dead, but that's another matter entirely. But that was it. It was one of the big things. I'm the divinely appointed ruler, and I can arrange for you to live after death if you do what I tell you to do. And obviously nobody's going to come back from death and say, hey, he lied. So it's a wonderful, wonderful scam. Now, speaking of the pharaohs, this is a classic case of absolute lie and propaganda, and it has to do with Ramses' victory at Kadesh. Now, in 1274 BC, Ramses II, or Ramses the Great, by his own admission, was in the middle of his campaign to expand Egypt's territory, not unlike the present-day United States. So Ramses invaded the Hittite Empire to the north and fought a decisive battle at the city of Kadesh in May of that year. Now, Ramses got suckered in by 2 Hittite spies and sent his army into an absolute trap, and he almost lost his entire army at Kadesh. Ramses was forced to sign the Treaty of Kadesh, which is history's earliest known non-aggression pact, and then he retreated back to Egypt, which ended Egypt's period of expansion to the north. Now, Ramses, the maybe not as great as he thought he was, headed back home and started putting his energy and wealth into building huge temples to prove how manly and butch he was. But Ramses II had a problem. The Egyptian people were brainwashed into thinking Ramses II was the instrument of the gods, that he was a god or about to be one himself upon his death, and therefore infallible. He couldn't lose a war, could he? So Ramses II, knowing that the ordinary people of Egypt were hardly likely to ever travel into the Hittite kingdom and find out what really happened, simply lied to his people. The walls of Ramses' temples, which was the ancient Egyptian version of CNN, were covered with carved depictions showing Ramses defeating the Hittites at Kadesh. And those carvings are still there, proving that for thousands and thousands of years, rulers will lie to their people if they think they can get away with it. Now, in this case, the Canaanites did find out what happened at Kadesh, and emboldened by Ramses' defeat, revolted, which ended Egypt's dominion beyond the Sinai. But so successful was Ramses' propaganda on his temples that his victory at Kadesh became the accepted version of history up until the Hittites' copy of the treaty was discovered in 1906. The lie worked, and it lasted for thousands of years, and it was an absolute lie. Now, following the discovery of that Hittite copy of the Non-Aggression Pact, archaeologists have gone back to Kadesh, and they have found more and more evidence confirming Ramses lost. And most of modern history was based on Ramses' lie carved into his temples. If you've got the temple or if you've got CNN, you can lie and get away with it. Back then. Okay, we're going to be taking another break here for a commercial. And when we come on back, more of the great lies of rulers to their ruled throughout history. A continuing pattern of mendacity and deception. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And if you have a paper and pencil, go ahead and grab it because I have a couple of phone numbers with which you can call into the show for the remainder of our broadcast today. These are not going to be permanent numbers. The 800 number will be coming back. But if you really feel you have a comment or question, you can dial area code 512-716-1523 or area code 512-716-1603 or 512-716-1883. So we'll see what happens with that. And meanwhile, getting on back to the lies throughout history. The next one I want to talk about is called the donation of Constantine. Now, prior to the time of Constantine, kingship was either won in battle or inherited from father to son. There was no specific formal ceremony on taking the throne, just a really wild party. And by the time of Constantine, the church decided they needed to have more control over who was going to be the rulers of Europe. So they invented themselves the ritual of coronation, in which the Bishop of Rome, which is the other name of the Pope, prayed over Constantine and slapped a crown on his head. Constantine apparently was caught by surprise by all this, and he was very angry over the church presuming to have the final say-so over his being the ruler. Now, following Constantine's death, and by the way, he wasn't actually baptized a Christian until he was on his deathbed and too weak to say, get the heck out of here. There was a document that came out called the Donation of Constantine, which supposedly donated the imperial regalia of Rome to the church with the request that it be loaned to all future rulers of the Roman Empire. That loan took the form of the ritual of coronation. The Donation of Constantine was a complete forgery by the church to give the church control over who would and would not sit on the throne. All right, we've actually got a caller. My goodness, we've got a caller on the line here. Alert the media. Dan in Washington State, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks. I'm kind of new to the show. Just wondering what you know, because you're having phone problems today, and I haven't been able to get on Rents Radio for about 2 weeks. So do you know if this kind of censorship seems to really be ramping up here, you know?
Well, in the case of our phones, there's a very benign explanation for what's going on and no indication of malice. But certainly websites that are critical of Hillary are under attack. My server's been under attack on a nonstop basis for over a month now. And we do know that a lot of other truth activist websites are being DOS'd or hacked into and broken. So it really is a cyber war out here. We're the front line of the war for the truth right here.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I like you guys, and I listen to Rents Radio too, and it's been like 2 weeks where I just get I use Verizon hotspot, and it's only with that hotspot, and it just says DNS server not found, you know, and I don't know if that's a sign that it's being...
Well, I'll have to go in and look at that, but if it says DNS server not found, what that's telling you is the DNS server is something your device connects to that maps the name Rents Radio to the numeric IP address, you know, blah blah dot blah blah dot blah blah dot blah blah. And if that may be a configuration issue on your machine. One thing you might want to look out for, there are certain forms of malware that try and hijack your DNS server in order to get you to use a different DNS server, which can be used for tracking and marketing information and so forth. And if the malware puts the wrong numbers into your DNS server, then you can get those kinds of problems. In the end, if you do an IP that's all 8s, That's Google's public DNS server, and it's very reliable. Okay?
Okay, all right, thanks. Appreciate your show. I've only had I don't have problems like at any other Wi-Fi spot except my Verizon. So it could be just attacking my Verizon hotspot. But anyway, thanks for your comments. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, you're welcome here. And the hotspots being run by the cell phone companies can be problematic. I know here on Oahu, the AT&T hotspots, very, very difficult, always overloaded. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And a reminder, the temporary phone number to call into the show is area code 512-716-1523. You don't need to remember the others. It'll roll over automatically if the line is, in fact, busy. So getting on back to lies throughout history, how rulers lie to their people to get what they want. The next one I want to mention, and by the way, I did post this article to WhatReallyHappened.com so you can finish up reading all about it, because it's a huge, huge story, and it really ought to be something young people are aware of. Government lying to you is not unusual. It is not rare. It is not shocking. It is business as usual. So during the Crusades, it was going back and forth and back and forth. Basically starting in the 1130s, the Turkish Empire began to encroach on the Crusader kingdoms of the Holy Land. And the original Crusaders, having fulfilled their oaths to the church, had taken their little palm leaves as a souvenir to prove that they were there and gone back home. And they were trying to organize a new crusade. And people were kind of a little leery about that. This was the time of the Knights Templar, who ostensibly were there to guard the pilgrim route to the Holy City, but in reality were spending all their time digging under the temple for who knows what. So basically, in 1145, Hugh, the Bishop of Jabala, went to meet the brand new Pope, Blessed Eugene III, to ask for help setting up a new crusade. Now, Pope Eugene, who was a lot less bloodthirsty than his predecessors, was kind of balked at a whole new crusade so soon after the last one. And Hugh told the Pope that a new crusade would be easy and cheap because somewhere far to the east of the Holy Lands was the kingdom of Prester John. And the story was that Prester John was a descendant of one of the three wise men who had been to the birth of Jesus, and that he had this amazing, expensive, magical kingdom, and he was ready to attack the far side of the Muslims as long as the Pope was ready to attack the front side. And that was the way the story went. Well, they had the crusade. Prester John never showed up, but they still used him again for all the subsequent crusades. And this went on for hundreds of years, far longer than Prester John could have possibly been alive. And then after Marco Polo, as the map of the East began to fill in, there was no Christian kingdom out there. So it was moved to Africa. The kingdom of Prester John is in Africa. And they literally kept playing this story over and over and over again. And believe it or not, it has survived to this very day, because the tales of the amazing wonders of the kingdom of Prester John became part of the tales of the Baron Munchausen, which was very popular books in Germany and was eventually made into the movie, Baron Munchausen. And it all began with a hoax to start a war. Yes, we can do the war. We've got all these other people. One of the other lies that you've probably been told, of course, is that Columbus did not actually discover the New World. He discovered the islands off the New World, but the idea that, well, first Spain tried to give it to Amerigo Vespucci, who was a very close friend of the royal court. He actually, his early career, he'd been a writer of pornography. But he was close friends with the court, and so after Columbus had discovered the islands and knew the continent was there, they gave Amerigo a ship, and he went, found the mainland, and they gave him the credit. And it wasn't until Columbus's son wrote the biography that they shifted the credit back to him. One of the reasons for that dodge was for Spain to be able to claim credit over the New World, ignoring the fact that the Vikings had already been there, the Egyptians had already been there. And one little aspect of the story that you're not really familiar with, Columbus knew the New World was there. It wasn't just a guess, because the Vikings had been to the New World. The Vikings traded with the Arabs traded with the Templars, and the Templars had the Viking maps. Columbus' wife was from a surviving Templar family. And if you remember the classic depiction of Columbus's ships, they have the splayed red cross on the sails. That's the cross of the Knights Templar. That little aspect of the story has been erased. Now, as Spain began to open up the New World, the riches weren't exactly coming on in. The whole original point of the expedition was to open up the Far East, and Columbus had kind of fibbed about that. And the New World wasn't really providing the huge amounts of gold and jewels and wealth that were desired. So Spain was sending off the conquistadors. The conquistadors were kind of not all that enthusiastic, but they were lured on by another big lie, the 7 cities of gold. And the story of that one was started back in the year 711, when General Tariq ibn Ziyad led his forces from Africa to Iberia and conquered all of Spain in mere months, until El Cid kind of spoiled that whole party. And Tariq's mountain, that's Gibraltar. And part of the story was that 7 bishops of 7 wealthy churches took the wealth of their church and spirited it away to the New World. And so the leaders of the Spanish conquistadors were saying, somewhere out there in this New World are these 7 cities built of the gold taken from Spain. And that's what lured them all on, this promise of gold. And there were reports that cities could be seen in the distance gleaming with gemstones. Actually, it was probably just mica in the mud. And the locals came to understand that if they said they didn't know anything about the cities of gold, they would be killed. So they would say, oh yeah, the cities of gold, we know, it's just over the next mountain range. You know, it's like Boy Scouts playing with smoke shifters or left-handed wrenches. You just get rid of them, send them over the next place. And it just lasted forever. They even had maps showing the 7 cities of gold. The early Amiga computers actually had a game based on the 7 cities of gold. And it was another big whopping lie that was used to manipulate people to go on out and conquer countries for the royalty. It was a big, huge bluff. Now, one of the biggest lies ever foisted on the human race was the witch hysteria of the Middle Ages. And it came about because when the Little Ice Age started, people were praying in their churches for God to bring back the warmer weather, and it wasn't happening. And it was creating a crisis of confidence. The priests were looking at congregations who were saying, what's going on here? We thought you had the inside track, to the Holy Father, and that he was omnipotent and could do whatever we prayed for. And the weather kept getting colder and colder. There was one rather amazing story about this glacier that was starting to impact a village. And all the local clergy went out there and did incense and candles and everything, and the glacier still ate the village. So the church was afraid of losing power and authority over the people. And so they came up with this idea that the reason God could not bring back the warm weather was because there were Satan's forces on the ground in the form of the witches, which led to torture and burnings. And, of course, along the way, the church was confiscating all the wealth of everybody who was accused. But it was just another huge lie to control the population, to keep them subservient, to keep them ruled. Let's see. Here's another good story. Napoleon in Egypt. In 1797, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt as part of a campaign to economically weaken England by cutting off her trade with the Orient. And the French people were told this is a mission of science, not of conquest. And in order to keep that illusion, Napoleon's forces did actually go on out and do drawings of Egypt's ancient wonders. They discovered the Rosetta Stone, which was an amazing find and allowed Champollion to finally decode hieroglyphics and discover that it was not just a symbolic but a phonetic language as well. Now, left unsaid in all these reports is that Napoleon failed miserably to control Egypt. He was defeated by Admiral Lord Nelson. at the Nile. And again, that was hidden from the ordinary people. All right, we have another phone call. Kathleen in Paris. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. I'm so happy to talk to you. Well, before I tell you what's on my mind, I would like you to know that your site is under attack from calls from abroad, because I've been trying to call for about an hour, and, you know, I keep trying, but usually I get something like, well, you know, if you know the person you want, dial the extension now, and that sort of thing. So you're really, really under attack.
Well, no, Kathleen.
From abroad.
No, Kathleen. The fact of the matter is, our phone system is having technical issues today. This is not a hack.
Okay.
It's not. We get a lot of those. In this case, this is just equipment issues, and it's not of nefarious intent. But I can understand why, given how many attacks are taking place, you might leap to that conclusion. Anyway, what's on your mind?
Well, oh, good. I'm happy to know that. Well, what's on my mind is the fact that the divide and conquer thing.
Yes.
Because most people want to, I think most people are good and they want, you know. So what's on my mind is I saw two, what do you call it? Two people doing independent journalism about the democracy, you know, the DNC.
Yes.
And there was a demonstration of the Black Lives Matter. And so the Black Lives Matter were having a march. And two journalists from the Independent, they were like, okay, stay with me.
Are you talking about the case where the white journalists were made to walk to the back of the crowd?
Yes.
Yeah, I did see that, and I have a serious problem with that, because you do not cure racism by being racist in your turn. And whether this is payback or whatever, this is the very wrong thing to be doing if ending racism is your issue. If, on the other hand, you're trying to increase the racial tension, then, of course, committing more racism in reverse is only going to infuriate people.
Exactly. And so I wanted to point out that the divide and conquer thing.
Yes, we're well aware our government likes to play that game. They were doing it back in the 1960s to divide the American people at a time when the American people were starting to unite in opposition to the war in Vietnam. They're trying to do it right now because the American people are very concerned about just how corrupt our entire federal government has become. And let's be honest, most of the state governments as well. So, yes, this is a common tactic.
What I think is going, yeah, I just think that's what's going on, is the divide and conquer, because I think the journalists and the marchers, they all wanted to do good things.
Yes, left to themselves, most people are decent, altruistic human beings, but for politicians and opportunists and exploiters, they need tension, they need discontent to take advantage of for political gain. Whether it's blacks against the whites, men against women, gays against straight, this is the pattern. You create a crisis and then you offer everybody a solution in exchange for their money and obedience.
And the Black Lives Matter people need to understand that you know, they're being played, and that, you know, yes, their intentions are good, but they're being played. They
are being played, but whoever came up with this whole thing, it has backfired horribly, because originally Black Lives Matter were very pro-Hillary, and Hillary was exploiting racial tension as one of her big campaign points. You know, vote for me and I will ease the racial tensions in our society, which is exactly what Adolf Hitler did with the brown shirts. The brown shirts created all this ruckus and rioting in the streets, and Hitler said, vote me in and I will end all the rioting in the streets. And the German people voted Hitler into power, and Hitler called up the brown shirts and said, stop rioting. Then he had them all killed. And Hillary was playing that same game. But now the leadership of Black Lives Matter have switched sides. They're now going pro-Trump because they're saying anything that Hillary says she's going to do for the black people, we have no reason to believe she'll keep her word. And this is where her trust issues are really coming back to harm her. And that is her Achilles heel going into the November election.
Well, I hope she has two Achilles heels. And I'm really happy to know that it's some technical problem and it's not the fact that, you're under attack, because I will try to call again. And thank you a lot.
All right, well, thank you a lot as well here. We're going to let you go. And by the way, I've just been given word the 800 number is, in fact, working again. But we're almost out of time on the show today, but feel free to call in. We'll take calls right up to the end of the show. Now, getting on back to the lies, I'm going to speed up and just hit the high points. Like I said, I posted this article to WhatReallyHappened.com. The sinking of the USS Maine. Oh, it was a Spanish mine. Had to be a Spanish mine. The captain of the USS Maine said no. It was a coal bunker fire that got out of control and blew his ship up. But the newspapers and the government said it was a Spanish mine launching the Spanish-American War. Later on, investigation of the wreckage of the USS Maine confirmed it had been an onboard fire. There was no mine whatsoever. The Lusitania, we've talked about a lot recently on the show, was torpedoed by German U-boats. The official story, helpless passengers on a passenger liner. There were no weapons. It came out the Germans knew it was carrying weapons, took out ads in the New York paper saying, do not sail on this ship, it will be attacked, it's carrying war munitions. And divers entering the remains of the Lusitania in 1980 confirmed it was carrying weapons. And it just goes on and on. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. Saddam's nuclear weapons. Government lies all the time to get from you that which they want from you. Your money, your obedience, the life and limb of your children for their wars of conquest. They're always lying. It's an old joke. How do you tell if a politician's lying? Their mouth moves and words come out. It really is true. And young people especially need to understand that. We'll be right back with the last segment of our program today. Hi, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today here. And as I said, I put this article of the liars on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. And you may want to think about reading it and sharing it, especially with young people, to understand that governments always lie to their people to get what they want. It's been a constant throughout history. And the point of the truth movement is not necessarily to identify and punish a single lie, but to remind people everywhere that the lies are a constant from government and the corporate media. Pertinent today, of course, are the lies used to start wars or grab more power. The Reichstag fire, which resulted in the Enabling Acts. The Gleiwitz incident, where Hitler sent his own people to attack this German radio station and framed Poland for it, to start war with there. Pearl Harbor, contrary to the version you've been taught in school and shown in movies, was not a surprise. President Roosevelt spent the entire year of 1941 goading the Japanese following a plan developed by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum on how to provoke Japan into the attack. And then they acted like it was a complete surprise. Those dastardly, so forth and so on. Right now, pretty much all of America understands the official story around the assassination of John F. Kennedy is a complete fraud. I mentioned the torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, blaming the Iowa explosion on a gay sailor when it was actually poorly stored ammunition. TWA 800, remember the Y2K nonsense, killer bees, stolen Kuwaiti incubators, and of course, my favorite, Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons and mobile biological weapons laboratories. That was a big steaming pile of lies. The good news is, and again, it's another indicator we live in a new age, because of the internet, because of the independent media, the lifespan of these government lies is shorter and shorter and shorter. It took almost 30 years to reach a point where half of Americans understood the Warren Report was a fiction. These days, the life expectancy of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer. And that's a healthy thing, because the skeptical people are a free people. Why shouldn't you trust the government? Because it is the government. Because politics attracts the very sort of people who shouldn't be allowed to have power, and yet they lust for it. And they will do whatever it takes to enlarge that power. And they really are out of control. I mean, we live in a country where it's actually illegal in many places to collect rainwater on your own property. Even Hitler didn't do that. So, the lesson of this article is an important one. We have to change that paradigm. We cannot let another generation of Americans grow up brainwashed into believing that our government is always truthful, and our corporate media is always trustworthy, that nobody in a position of authority in science or medicine or the church should be presumed above reproach and question. Because in all of those areas, there have been some serious, serious problems, whether it's the child molestation scandal, vaccines that cause more harm than good, stolen elections. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. And yes, the lovely Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. So make a point of sharing everything you learn here with all your friends, co-workers, families, fellow students. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.